Hello everyone, this is Professor Hill. This is a short video for our class Introduction to Ethics Philosophy 2306 here at St. Philip's College. This is the online fall 2018 version of the class. Today is September the 19th, 2018. It's a Wednesday, and I'm actually still grading from your last assignment, which I apologize. I'll try to get them up. I just had a couple of things that came up yesterday, couldn't get to them, so sorry about that. But I'm working on it today. That all being said, while I'm grading the last assignment, you're looking forward to the next one, which begins with Chapter 2 in our textbook, Doing Ethics by Louis Vaughan. So what we're doing now is we're reading this chapter called Subjectivism, Relativism, and Emotivism. And as I mentioned briefly in my last video, as you start to read this chapter and you get introduced to four main concepts. Now, what's interesting about the four is that the chapter just lists three of them. The chapter is called Subjectivism, Relativism, and Emotivism. So you might have thought, well, the chapter is about three things. Well, no, you think, look, right off the bat, page number 1 in our textbook, he says there's going to be emotivism, subjective relativism, cultural relativism, and then objectivism. And so on the first page, he outlines these four things. And there's even a little quick review box there at the beginning of the chapter where he says, this chapter is about these four things. And so then what happens is he launches into discussion. And in the chapter, you'll notice as you start to flip through the pages, he talks about emotivism and cultural relativism and subjective relativism. And then he's like, stops. And he doesn't do a section on objectivism. In fact, what you'll notice in the book is that in the chapter 2, he does actually mention objectivism once. He has one sentence about it, okay? So what happens is when you look at the book in the chapter, it starts with subjective relativism. He says, look, I'm going to talk about these four things. Number 1, subjective relativism, and he chats about it for 2 pages. He gets to cultural relativism, and he talks about that for like 4 or 5 or 6 pages. He really doesn't like that one, right? But then, as he gets to the third and final thing he's going to talk about, he actually gets to emotivism. And right there, between the end of cultural relativism and the beginning of emotivism, there's this one sentence, okay? Because what he's done is he spent 6 pages tearing apart cultural relativism and telling you how terrible it is. And he kind of sums up by saying this. He says, the crux of the matter is that cultural relativism does a poor job of explaining some important features of our moral experience. And then this is the one sentence. A far better explanation of these features is that some form of moral objectivism is true. And that's all he says. And then he goes on to emotivism, and then he wraps up the chapter with a little, in summary, and that's it. So what he's saying is, look, there are these 4 different approaches, and I need to spend a whole chapter telling you about how 3 of them, which he makes this kind of dichotomy between 2 things. He says over here is relativism, and over here is objectivism. And the relativism, it's got these 3 different forms or types, and I'm going to spend the whole chapter telling you about why they don't work and how terrible they are and why they're horrible, terrible theories. And then on the objective side, I'm not going to spend any time talking about it. I'm just going to tell you the one sentence, which is, oh yeah, this one's true. And we're done. That's it. Now, there's several problems with this, not least of which is he doesn't talk about the problems of objectivism. In fact, he didn't even explain anything about objectivism other than he does give you the definition. In the quick review box, he just says, look, objectivism, the view that some moral principles are valid for everyone. And then he just defines it. Well, even in that same little quick review box, with each of the other three definitions, cultural relativism, subjective relativism, emotivism, he gives you the definition, and then he has this little thing where it says implications, which means basically why this one's wrong, okay? Well, here's the thing. As he describes those three theories, I think personally he does a good job of explaining the real challenges, the real problems facing this relativistic approach to ethics. So he's got that part down. He doesn't talk about the positive aspects of it, because to him there aren't any. The whole chapter is about listing the bad things around those three parts, all of which are together with relativism. But when he gets to objectivism, he just says it's true, and you just have to take him on your word with that, because he's not going to explain it. He's not going to talk about the problems that it faces. And so when you read the chapter, here's my advice. You got to remember this. He's not a professor who is standing back and explaining to you, these are different moral theories, and here are the problems, the pros and cons associated with each one. Because what he's doing here is he's describing them, he's listing them, but he's also selling you one. Because he thinks objectivism, is the right one, and he's so confident that he doesn't even need to defend it. He just needs to tell you it's the right one. And then he'll spend his whole time tearing down the other three. So you got to remember, he's not, objectively standing back and describing these things. He's selling one of them and tearing down the others. So you got to remember that when you're reading chapter 2. He's happy to tell you that he's biased, and that his bias is, I'm here to tear these down. Now, I'm not saying there aren't problems with the cultural relativism, the subjective relativism, emotivism. I think, like I said, he points out some really good problems. But here's the other thing he does. There's a thing in philosophy it's called creating a straw man. And what that means is, I want you to think of a scarecrow, like literally a straw man that's sitting on a pole made of straw, okay? Like a scarecrow, right? Well, if you were going to get into a boxing ring and fight someone, your opponent might be a really good boxer. And they might have really, great technique and strong arms, and they might be really powerful, and they might be somebody that's going to make for a really tough fight. So if you could substitute and take away that dangerous real fighter and bring in a scarecrow and put a scarecrow in the middle of a boxing ring, you could do pretty well against a scarecrow. It's just literally a figure made of straw. You could just get out there and punch that thing to pieces in no time. Well, in philosophy, that is an analogy that people use for this, which is, okay, here's an argument. It's kind of a strong argument. I'm against it. So what I'm going to do is not describe to you, the audience, what that argument really is, and give you an accurate, detailed picture of that argument with all of its strengths. What I'm going to do is just create something which is a weaker version of that. I'm going to create a straw man. It's an argument that I can easily defeat. So it's a mischaracterization of somebody else's position to intentionally fool the audience so that you can then go out there and beat them up and win the day, because you're not really facing the opponent, you're facing the straw man that you created. Well, I hate to say that. I think some of that's going on with our chapter here, because when you start to look at the way he defines and then characterizes these three different moral theories, he does it in a way where he says, look, he says there's really three different levels. There are relativists, and this is what they think good and bad, right and wrong is based upon. This is their theory. And their theory is that either there is no right or wrong, that's emotivism, that it's just somehow when people are talking about ethical issues, they're just really expressing emotions. They're not really saying there's a right and wrong, good and bad. In fact, they don't believe that. The next thing is they think that the basis or foundation for all morals and ethics and values is me, that it's subjective. His definition is the view that I think an action is morally right if I think so. So I'm the standard of good and bad, right and wrong. And that runs into problems pretty quickly. And the last one is subjective relativism, which he says is just like subjective relativism, and only the basis is your culture. So there's different societies, different cultures, and they think the determinant for right and wrong, good and bad is their limited culture. And that there's nothing, no objective standards that apply to everyone. They say, no, it's all just conditioned upon your society. What your society thinks is right or wrong is right and wrong. Now, he's doing this for a reason, which is that with all of those, whether there is no right or wrong, good or bad, whether that's up just to you or whether it's determined by your society or culture, the way he defines these things, the way he sets them up, he's doing it in a way to where they're absolute in each situation. He's really attacking absolutism. Because if you and the next person and this person over there are all the determiner, the absolute foundation of good and bad, right and wrong, and you're in conflict, then all of a sudden the implications that he outlines flow if it's absolute. It's the same thing with cultures. If you're saying my culture is absolutely right and wrong, and if y'all's culture over there, you think something different, well, then y'all just happen to be wrong because mine is right. I'm the standard absolutely. Well, then again, his chapter makes a whole lot of sense. But as you can tell, I think that really a lot of what he's doing here is creating a straw man. He is saying, he's really attacking positions when run to their absolute limits. There's no compromise. There's no middle ground. There's no even further explanation or nuance about this. He says these three theories, this is what the definitions are, and when you define them that way, look how easy it is to tear them apart. That's chapter 2. Now, tomorrow, so right now I want you to read the chapter, go through, but do it with an eye towards his, stated bias about objectivism. Get a better understanding of what he's saying for each of those three things that he actually talks about here in the chapter. Make special note of the fact that emotivism is not someone who makes decisions based on their emotions. For some people, it sounds like that. Like, oh, emotivism, that must be people who decide good and bad, right and wrong based on their emotions. That's not at all what he's saying. That's got nothing to do with it. But get familiar with those things. And then tomorrow, what I'm going to do is circle back and talk about what I think is a better definition, a more accurate characterization of those three schools of thought and of relativism in general. Because what we're going to find is there's a difference between relativism and absolute relativism. And he's attacking absolute relativism or absolutism. And when you do that, it's kind of easy, and that's what he does. But we're also going to have to talk about objectivism. And again, what's appealing about it as a moral theory, and what are the problems that it faces? Because there's a few out there. So anyway, that's our introduction to chapter 2. Read it, think about it, look at those definitions, look at what he's saying, how he's defining it. And then tomorrow, we're going to take a little bit more nuanced approach to this. All right, so that's the lesson for today, Wednesday the 19th. Take care. Bye-bye.